Getting out of the pit. I would think that all of us are affected by what's going on in the Ukraine right now, has been going on, and God only knows how long will go on, right? So that is something that affects all of us. That won't be our focus today, but some of the things that we look at may be helpful as we deal with that as well. Getting out of the pit. Now, Dee Dee, you are really, you might term it responsible for, or the impetus for us to look at it this way. And it's a term that some of you may use and some of you may experience, but I think it's a good term. It's a general enough term that we can use that in a way that hopefully will be applicable to maybe to all of us. The pit. You may have heard this little word that says, if you find yourself in the pit, the first thing to do is quit digging, so we don't keep digging ourselves deeper in the pit. I think sometimes when we get in a pit, we can keep going deeper and deeper. One of my favorite, I don't know how you feel about this, but one of my favorite people is Richard Rohr. And I love his writings, and I always appreciate his perspective. So I know our focus is really on getting out of the pit. I think it's helpful for us to look at a context for this as well. So I'm going to share with you a few words from Richard Rohr. He said, I know that any kind of defeat or humiliation is not the American way, but it is surely the biblical way. There, the pattern is rather clear, and there's no going up until you go down. And so we know that. Only our strong cultural bias or culpable blindness would allow us to miss the central biblical theme that is everywhere in plain sight. The examples in Scripture are almost too numerous to count, ending, of course, with Jesus himself and his crucifixion and resurrection. And as we know, we're going into Lent. He said that the Joseph saga is the classic sibling rivalry and jealousy. Joseph's brothers throw him into the pit and then sell him into slavery to assuage their guilt over actually killing him. As always, some manufactured difference is used to justify the crime. So they write him off as the master of dreams. Little do they know that this person they'd thrown in the pit because of his dreaming, it was his dreaming that really brought freedom to them. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way as we look at this and what we gain from being in the pits. I will be open to this being as dialoguing as you would like it to be, but I'm curious about when you think about the pits, what you think of when you think about being in the pit. I do hear that in my office. If any of you want to put messages up to Stephen or questions or comments, I'll be open to receiving them. But I'm curious about what comes to people's mind when they think about the pit or in the pits. I looked up the origin in our country as best I could for this, and it seems as though it became sort of popular for a while in the mid part of the last century, and it was really referring to miners in coal mines, that they were working in the pits, and their working conditions were in the pits, and it became a term that maybe went beyond that as well. Now, I would imagine that it's a deep hole. I guess one way is that many people think it's a deep hole. It's a deep hole that you can get into and it's really hard to get out of. Now, some of you from literature will remember The Pit and the Pendulum, right? Remember, some of you literature remember that, reading that and maybe being assigned that. Edgar Allan Poe, right? And isn't it a vivid image of that? And some of you may remember a movie, old movie with Vincent Price, right? Having lead role in that, and that image of that, the pendulum, and it was going to kill him. And you know, it took place during the Spanish Inquisition, and just know he's going to die. He's going to fall in the pit, and he's going to die. But finally, here come the French troops in, and they save him. And unlike many other Poe stories, it has a good ending, and it gives us hope. And I think that would be true for us as well. Now, I'm not meaning to insult your intelligence and reading of literature, but do any of you remember Irma Bombeck?
Oh, yes.
Good. I see smiles on your faces when I see that. Wasn't she a delightful, wonderful writer? And many of you can remember her being on like the Johnny Carson show way back when. Those who are old enough to remember that. And she was a delightful guest. And one of her books was entitled, If Life is a Bowl Full of Cherries, What Am I Doing in the Pits? And in her own wonderful, humorous way, she referenced that. I'm going to share with you a little bit from the first part of her book that I think fits for what we're talking about. She said, I've always worried a lot. And frankly, I'm really good at it. Are any of you really good worriers? Good. Worry. Now, we know what Jesus says about worry, but I think most of us have it to an art form. People can worry, and people are worried right now. What is going to happen in the Ukraine? What's happening in my life right now? What's going to happen next? What's going to be the next COVID strain? Whatever, but we can worry. And she said, I've always worried a lot. And I even worry about introducing people. Have you ever been in one of those situations? You're trying to think of the person you're supposed to be knowing their name to introduce them. She says it's even can be something as simple as that. But mostly she said, I worry about surviving, keeping up with the times in a world that is changing, as she said, daily. And doesn't it though? And we know about it. Now we can say it changes moment by moment, and you get breaking news that keeps us informed and up to date and worried even more. She said, I worry. Is this something I'm supposed to protest, or am I to be an advocate for? I don't know. I'm not really sure about that. And then she says, never in the history of this country have warriors had such a decade as the 70s when she wrote this. And so it's probably doesn't discriminate according to decade, but we know people worry a lot now. Each year, she said, have produced a bumper crop of warriors larger than the year before, and this year promises to be even better. No wonder I'm in the pits. Well, anyway, worry. Don't we worry? I think worrying is one of those examples of what helps to get us into the pit. And we can worry, and usually the worry is not productive for us, but it really does give us difficult times, and it helps us to be stuck. That's one of the words that you mentioned, Stephen. If we worry and we worry and we worry enough, we get stuck. I think some people really associate worry with care or with love, and that's understandable. Many of you who have family, like you were implying a little bit earlier, Dee Dee, or you have children, you're going to worry what's going on in the world or in your job or the economy. If you looked at the stock market lately, whatever it might be for you, we can really worry a lot. But usually worry is not productive. And so I think that helps us get into a pit, and it probably helps us to keep going deeper into a pit. So I'd like you to tell me and communicate to Stephen, what are some of the worries? Now, we might not be able, we'll be able to address every worry, but what do you think, if you think of us as a group, not just your specific thing of the day, but what are some of the basic worries you think people have these days? What comes to your mind? Worries. I'm open to hearing any feedback until I see something show up. I'll keep talking. But what are some of the worries you have? Worries.
Let me tell you, since Terry has invited you to share a worry, one way that you can make sure that you don't leave your mic open is to just press the space bar. If you have a space bar on your laptop, when you do that, it temporarily unmutes you and you can speak. I'm doing it right now. And when I let go of the space bar, I'll be muted again. So in response to his question, you might just chime in with a word. We don't have any such responses in the chat yet, Terry.
That's right. I'll just go ahead. The pit that we get into. How many of you have read The State of Our Environment? You bet. How many of you are familiar with the autobiography and 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson? How many of you are familiar with the autobiography and 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson? Now, once I start sharing this with you, you probably will say, I have heard that or have heard of that, but I didn't know with this group. So since you haven't, I really want to share that with you. The autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. I'll tell you just a little bit about Portia Nelson, since you've probably not heard of her either. Portia Nelson was born in Utah, and she was the youngest of 9 children. So you could know she grew up in a farming Mormon family, and she was a good singer. And so she left home and started singing in cabarets, probably worried her parents. Don't you imagine that she was singing in cabarets? But she liked writing songs, and she liked singing, and she wrote songs that were sung by everybody from Julie Andrews to Debbie Reynolds. And she had bit parts in different movies, and including The Sound of Music. And she wrote a song that became famous, but was not really bringing her fame. And I'll tell you that one of her songs was sung at an inauguration for a president on January 20th, 1993, at the inauguration of President Bill Clinton. The mezzo-soprano Marilyn Horne, remember that great voice, Marilyn Horne, a close friend of Portia Nelson, sang a song that you may now have heard of, Make a Rainbow. Have you ever remember that song, Make a Rainbow? And it was written in the 1960s, and she dedicated it to Horne's biracial daughter. And these are not the poetic lines, but gives you a flavor of that song. Make a rainbow, that the colors dance and shine, and we, all the colors of children, everywhere shine with shines of love. I think that gives you just a little flavor of what she was like. So, the autobiography in 5 short chapters. I'm going to read through it real quickly to you. It's short, so don't worry. It's not going to bore you, I do not think. But follow along with me, and then we'll kind of look at this piece by piece as a way of getting out of the pits. That's really our focus for today. Chapter 1. People are losing the ability to listen, can't hear. Can you hear okay? Someone said they couldn't. Okay. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. It isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. It's my fault. I know where I am. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. This time I walk right around the edge of it. And chapter 5, I walk down a different street. What do you think about that little autobiography in 5 short chapters? Any quick responses that you have? I do see some smiles and nods, but yeah, isn't it sort of true? Good.
Well, the pit for me is social media and the news. And so that would be, and it's interesting that we're talking about this. The February devotional in Jesus Calling said, don't even go near the edge of the pit.
That's what, yes,
So,
I love it.
So that's it.
Thank you, Reggie. As you listen to that, you might well imagine this is something I share with a number of people I see in therapy. And we look at this in ways that hopefully will be helpful to them as well. As you might hear it, some of you might know that it really is something that people in 12-step programs can be familiar with. People in AA, many of them are familiar with this because they know what that can be like. So if we look at this almost chapter by chapter real quickly, that first one is this, I just walk down the street, we're on our way along, and there's a deep hole. Most all of us know there's a deep hole somewhere for us that we can fall into that is not beneficial. And we fall into it and you feel lost and helpless. But many times we will say, it's not my fault, right? And have you ever noticed some people are like that? It's hard to take accountability and responsibility for what we do. Our tendency is often to do what? You just blame someone else, right? Just blame someone else. Do you know blamers? we all have, I'll tell you personally, this one is blind spots. I think is a useful term for many of us. We all have our blind spots. One of the things I do a lot of premarital seminars called commit. And these are couples, almost all of whom are engaged. And many of them will say, I say, have you learned some things about yourself now that you're in a serious relationship? Not only do you learn about the other person, but we learn about ourselves. Maybe my life wasn't as perfect as I thought, or I wasn't as perfect as I thought I was, or my family's way was maybe the only way. It's interesting as we get to know other people because we have blind spots. I'll tell you very personally where I first began to experience this. Some of you may know I was a hospital chaplain for a number of years at Parkland Presbyterian. And I was training to be a chaplain supervisor. I was very young. You have to realize I was in my 20s, naive, I guess, in some ways. And the process of clinical pastoral education training, they wanted you to see your growing edges. Nice term for, some faults that you have or problems that you have, and maybe you've not seen before. And it became very apparent. And I learned a lot of things about myself that I still remember that were brought out to me in a time when I wasn't aware of them myself. Chapter 2, walk down the same street, there's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I still don't see it as there. Many times it takes a while, doesn't it? I fall in. I cannot believe I'm in the same place, but it still isn't my fault. It takes a long time for many of us to admit maybe we have something to do with it. Denial. Denial is a word you'll hear 12-step people use a lot, denial, and it's more than a long river in Egypt, they will say, right? Many times we just stay in denial and we don't want to see it. It's understandable if you look at the grief process. Denial is understandable because it's so painful. But if we stay in denial, usually things get worse rather than better. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. Sometimes we gain awareness. That probably is a start. It's not the end. I still fall in though, because it is a habit. What do you think about the habit part? Now, she says, it's my fault. I know where I am. I get out immediately. My experience is awareness does not mean immediate change. Now, that's my experience with that. But it's a habit. Much of our life is made up of habits. If we think about it, good habits, bad habits, and we can keep falling into them. Some of them are sort of neutral habits. All of us have exercised a lot of habits already this morning, right? Doing things, whatever we do. What maybe are some habits that some people have that really create deep holes for them or maybe us? What comes to your mind? What are the things that are bad habits we have that cause problems for us and sometimes others as well? Habits.
Well, Terry, I want to reward somebody for using the chat and bring up something that she said that relates to this. One of our listeners said it's hard to have conversations with people today because they're so quick to get angry if they're dealing with somebody with a different opinion. And maybe that's kind of got a habit aspect to it too.
Yes, it is.
Not just for other people, for ourselves. How do we react?
I think you're using the words to describe it. It's immediate and it's a reaction. It doesn't ever even hit the prefrontal cortex. It is an instantaneous reaction to something. And you can hear a word and people will react. And we all have them that, when I hear that, it causes me to feel this way, or I think this way. So, and it becomes, and the more we do it, it's when it becomes a habit. The first time may not have triggered such a great reaction from us, but I think the fact is we get it reinforced by things we hear or read or watch or believe or see or think about. And so, have any of you heard of the new book, Atomic Habits? I don't think I've mentioned that to this group. Atomic Habits. I think it's going to be a good book for all of us to read. I've not read it yet. I've heard his interviews for about 2 hours. And so Atomic Habits by James Clear, C-L-E-A-R. But I love what he had to say. And he is looking at how we have automatic habits. Now, as a therapist, we can talk about that regarding cognitive therapy, but just to use atomic habits, if you think of an atom, it's small. It is small, but it has so much power. And I think that's what happens. And he says that many times we're not aware of these to a very great degree, which I think is certainly being implied in this as well. And so it's interesting if we can make it obvious to us. And I will give this is a simple example, but we can expand it. He said, some people will say, I watch too much television. I don't know if that's true for any of you, or I watch too much. And he said, if you go into the home, you look at the arrangement of the chairs, and what are they facing? The screen, right? They're facing the screen. Now, as a therapist, you might imagine, I don't have a television set in my therapy office. It is about relationship. And so, some people have sitting rooms or libraries or whatever you might have where you really, it's made for conversation. Some of you may have rooms or locations that are made for that, but many times in people's homes, and I mean, it's not the screen, it's the big screen, right? And so it comes through so loud and clear. So he suggests, if you might change something for a habit that would be helpful for you, it might be that you just rearrange your chairs, or you have a covering for your television set, or if you have a cabinet, you might even close it sometimes. But if it's so obvious, something is so obvious, when we hear a word, it's a trigger. And if we might, my term I share with people in my office is, it's the second thought that counts. I will tell you, there's a man I see in therapy. He was referred to me by another psychologist. And his problem is he is a habitual liar. I'm not going to call it, he didn't say pathological liar, but he's a habitual liar. And the primary person he lies to is his wife. It's not because he's having an affair, but he just wants to stay out of trouble with his wife. And so his automatic reaction is to lie, And we've worked really hard. I think he's tried this for a long time, but he keeps falling into the pit. That's a term he would use. I fall into the pit of lying, mostly to my wife, but not many other people, but it's automatic for me to stay out of trouble. So I don't mean this to sound appreciating myself, but it's really interesting. I've emphasized that with him so much that he came up with the idea and I said, before you say anything, before you even say a word, I want you to be sure, is it the truth or not? And I would ask him questions. I said, no, I want you to pause before you even answer my question. I want you to think for a minute. Am I telling the truth? And so he began to pause. And many times it's that pause that counts. Now he has named that his Parsons pause. He named it after me, calls it the Parsons pause. And so, I would say that about 95, 96% of the time, he's pausing before he does something. And I think that's one of the things that helps us break a habit, if we just pause and think a little bit before we do something or say something. So it's a habit. Clear would say that another idea to have in mind about breaking or creating a habit, or breaking a bad habit and creating a good habit is one could be like exercise. Some of you're a fit looking group of people, you probably exercise. And he said, some people are just natural exercisers, but most of us are not. I will tell you personally, one of the things I do is I listen to a podcast while I exercise. Now, because of 3 car wrecks, I'm not able to do a lot of things I used to do, but it's a pleasant thing. I'm learning some things, and I do some exercise. I'll listen to a good podcast that is interesting or entertaining to me at least, and usually informative. Habits. One of the things he would say is to keep in mind for us is, what kind of person do you want to be? Think about this. What kind of person do you want to be? Get that very clearly in your mind. And think about your actions, your behaviors, maybe your thoughts, and how well do they align with how you want to be as a person. So when someone says a term that bothers me politically, rather than just going off and reacting and whatever else. Is that how, do I just want to be this reactive person that I allow someone else's comment to control my thoughts, my feelings, and whatever I say? Now, if you want that, and some people I think really want to do that, that's how they want to be. But if that's not how you want to be, think about, how do I want to be in particular situations? When I hear someone say something like that, how do I want to be? So you don't have to fill in the blanks for that right now, but I think it's a primary thing that he says is good for us to keep in mind. And then he said, make it easy. If things are too hard, we don't usually do it. He said many times the problem is we make our goals too big. Now, I'm not minimizing those of you who are into that and whatever, but he said many times we set this huge, huge goal, but many times we aren't able to achieve it. So one example is a person wants to walk a marathon. What if you walk a mile a day? You could probably pull that off. It may not be, you could do it all at the same time. But many times we think of big things. It's not anything wrong. Think big. I know that business principles are often based on that, but they're usually achieved, you and I know how, one step at a time. So try to make it easy. He said, if you want to read more and you don't feel like you have an hour to sit down and read, maybe read for 5 minutes. It may not be a lot, but at least you might read some of your writers probably. You may not be able to spend a whole day, but it may be a period of time that, I can really do that. I'll tell you, as a therapist, one thing is I like to do with people, it's about creating positive changes in their lives and relationships. And I like for them to do some things that probably isn't going to take much time, doesn't cost really any money, doesn't have any side effects, but be good for them. I think we've even talked about breathing exercise or something, maybe one of the sessions, but you could take a minute to just take breaths. Just take breaths before we respond, or let a second, maybe have 2 breaths before we even say anything. Some of your attorneys in here probably, aren't you? Some of you are any attorneys in this group? I can't see. But during my residency, one of the people in our group was a forensic psychologist. He said, if you're on the witness stand, don't ever answer automatically. Tell the truth. But if you're going to you've been asked a question, take a breath before you say anything. And only answer what's asked. Don't elaborate. If they want more information, they'll ask for it. But it's a simple thing for us to do. And I think your idea about political things or whatever are trigger words for us, we will just take a pause. Many times we have a mindset, but we don't have to be controlled by it. A fourth thing he says that's good for creating a good habit or helping us get out of a bad habit is to do something that's satisfying, is his simple term, satisfying. He said, remember when you're a little kid, and if you did something, the teacher said, you'll get a sticker if you do this. Now, it's a simple thing, but little kids, or get your star, for something in Sunday school attendance, whatever it might be for you. But if there's something that you can do, after I've done this, I think I'll do this. And that will be kind of my reward, if you want to think about it. So if you're looking at creating good habits and getting out of a tough place, create some things that you can do. And if you think about it, you just do the reverse of these things if you're wanting to break the habit and get out of a pit. So my hunch is many of you would like to create good habits, and the more you focus on good habits, those other habits will probably wane and lessen in importance to us. That's a little thought. Okay, any thoughts anybody have about that little piece? Habits.
Terry, I want to be fair to the person who submitted that comment that I shared with you. It may be a request to how do we respond to people who don't seem to be interested in developing that habit of of taking a breath before they say something? How do you deal with a contentious person without being equally contentious yourself? Do you know what I mean? That to not let their contentiousness trigger your own, to get into a argument about who's right. Um, are you
I will say,
understanding?
yeah, I think so. I think the same thing would be true for that as well. Before we react to something they've said to us, it would probably be a good idea for us to take a breath and be calm and say, you might say, I think I might have mentioned this at one time before, but just in case, I'll say, wow, tell me how you came to believe that, or tell me more about that. It's an interest, it's almost disarming when you ask that other person, wow, you have very strong feelings about that. Tell me about it. Let them tell you. Let them tell you, but you take breaths so you don't let it build up too much inside of you. And if they want to share more, they can. Or you could say, tell you what, I just see that differently. Would you be open to hearing my viewpoint or not? And they may or they may not. And if you feel like you're probably not going to make much, progress with that, say, tell you what, I just hear that differently. I don't think we're going to make much progress with that. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or do you think we can move forward? It depends on the person, the situation. I think I gave some examples maybe with you about parents with your children about political differences, and they came up with options. And someone would say, if we can have a conversation about our grandchildren or about our dog or whatever we may want to look forward to, or Christmas coming, I would be delighted to talk about that. But I just don't think we're going to agree about this. I'm not even calling it agree to disagree. I'm not calling it even that. We love you. We want to have a good relationship with you. But we know that when we get into talking about, as I said one time, the not politically correct or the polite topics of religion and probably politics, we just don't agree about it. Can we set that aside and just talk with each other about good things? Would that be, if you can't, let us know when you can. And I've known some parent children who've done even that kind of thing. And other times they say, well, it just doesn't seem like this is going to work. And then you move on. That's two or three just simple things, but I think it's hard.
I remember you sharing that wisdom with us at an earlier session. Not everybody's attended every session though, and it comes up again and again.
Yeah.
I think somebody else has submitted a comment that relates to it. There's an icon or a symbol in the Stephen Ministry program that cautions against let's see, I had it on my screen here a second ago, that encourages caregivers not to get pulled into the pit. So that goes along with this concept you're talking about. We don't want to become that which we detest or something like that.
I think you're right. The term many times is active listening, is that you listen to someone, they may have their viewpoint, and you just listen to them. You just listen to them, take some deep breaths, and you listen to them. I think that's where 1 Corinthians 13 comes in, and Dee, you can echo this maybe. It is to be patient and kind. You have to be patient and breathe probably to calm yourself down. You be kind, you can listen to them, you can nod your head if you want to, but if they have an issue, you simply listen to them. They may want to be heard, doesn't mean you have to agree, but you just listen to them. And you can say, wow, I can tell you have strong feelings about that, and that's very important to you, and I just care about you. And it's almost disarming. It's not being avoidant, but I think terms like that or positions like that can often be helpful. Just listen, just listen. Harder than easier said than done. But my experience is many times we're not going to change that other person's mind, certainly on the spot. Listen well. My hope would be that after you have left that person, let's say from a Stephen ministry perspective, that you hear them out and listen to them and you care about them and you can check, how can I be helpful to you in some way, or someone be helpful to you, or the church can be helpful to you, and just let you know, can I pray with you, or with something you'd like me to pray for you about? And you can pray for them right there. I think those are the kind of things you do in Stephen ministry. And for some of you, you might do in family or even in friendships as well.
Terry, I'm sure that everybody that walks in your door is trying to come out of some kind of pit, or they wouldn't be coming through your door. So I would be interested in how diversified you have to be to counsel and help these people, because there's not two problems alike, and so the amount of courage it takes on your part to counsel with people is to me is amazing. And I think I do some of that, as you know, and my best approach is to I think they know the answers if you give them enough time to talk it through.
I think that's a key thing. Thank you, Dee Dee. I'm always interested in, help me know why you're here, or what's going on with you. You invite them to share with you what's going on with them. Sometimes just the simple thing of being able to express what's going on inside of them is helpful, because many times people do not have another human being, maybe a dog, but not another human being who will really listen to them and hear them out. And so for another human being to give undivided attention for 50 minutes to an hour, or 50 minutes, or whatever you have, that in of itself, I think is helpful. I don't know if I share this term with you or not, but one of the terms I use in one of my books is called emotional constipation. We have all of these feelings inside, and sometimes it just helps if they're shared with another human being, and you listen to them, and you know that you can care. And sometimes I will say to them, no wonder you would feel that way. And I think, Stephen, you were saying something a little bit that made me think of that earlier before we got on live here, is that many times I would say, no wonder you would have those feelings, and almost affirming them as a human being and their feelings. Doesn't mean you have to agree with their perspective or what they've done, but that you listen to them and know that they're not crazy for having those feelings. They're upset, they're scared, they're anxious, they're worried, they're depressed, whatever their feelings are, but to be heard, I think, is an important thing. Then you begin to look at what you might be able to do. And I think that's kind of where that autobiography of 5 short chapters goes, is that, that's been painful for you for a long time. Can we look at some things that would be helpful? What are things you've already found to be helpful for you? And really put it back in their lap as best you can, like you're saying, if they can come up with some things that's really good. If they can't, then you can explore with them some things that might be helpful. I could give you many examples, but one of the people I saw in therapy years ago, she was I mentioned her in one of my books as well. She's very interesting. She was a professional entertainer. And I hear this well. She a full redhead and a wonderful entertainer, and very expressive. And she was upset with her husband. She was so mad at her husband because he would always seem to plan his business trips where there was going to be a NASCAR race, and he'd leave her home with the 3 kids. And she was mad at him, and so she tried to guilt trip him every time he was leaving home. She'd learned guilt tripping from guess whom? A real expert, and her mother in this case, not minimizing you mothers, so don't worry, but it didn't seem to work on her husband. So I said, wow, you just try to guilt trip him, don't you? Yes, it doesn't work. And I said, well, what would it be like? I ventured with her. What would it be like if you told your husband, I hope you have a good business trip and you enjoy the race? Now, I'll tell you, in that case, she flushed red. She said, I'd be lying if I said that to him. She said, I would have a miserable time. I said, so you can imagine when he's getting ready to leave on a business trip and she's giving him all of this grief, you can imagine how happy he was to get home, right? And you can imagine how miserable she was because he didn't care about her and the 3 kids. So I said, what would it be like if you ask him, told him, I hope you have a good business trip and you enjoy the race. She did not like that at first, but she was a person. I said, well, I would just imagine your husband over here in this other chair and that you're telling him, you know, I love you. Of my own free will, I did choose to marry you, and you've been good to me almost always. But the next time this comes up, I'm going to tell you, I hope you have a good business. She practiced that. And if you want to think about getting out of a habit, she started practicing in my office saying these words. Honey, it finally got to, honey, I hope you have a good business trip and you enjoy the race, till the point she could say, I can honestly say that to him. So you think this is good, right? Well, I never heard from her between sessions except this one time. And she called and she said, well, I did what we talked about. Oh, what did we do this time? She said, I told him that. Then she said, he just stood there. What do you think was going on inside of him? This was so different. He was in shock, I think. Then she said he went back to the bedroom, stayed a long time, long dramatic pause. Then she said he came back in and said he'd made 3 phone calls. He called his business partner. He called his partner in business. And he called a babysitter. He came back and said, tell you what, rather than come back on Tuesday, I'm going to come back in on town on Monday. And I'd like to take you out for dinner on Tuesday night. And I already have a babysitter lined up. Now, I'm telling you the truth. That doesn't usually happen, but it did happen in that case. There's something different we can do. And that's that other street we can take. Go down a different street. If we go down a different street, there'll be some potholes in that one as well, probably. But if it just keeps on track and it doesn't do any good, and you keep banging your head against the wall, maybe I'll try something different. And so I think that's something that we can all look at to benefit a situation. And otherwise, we are stuck. We're stuck, like you were saying, Stephen. We get stuck in going down that same street, as you know what's said about that, with the same results, right? So maybe there's another way. And I think that's what we do. You listen, get some of the frustration out, and then it opens our minds up a little bit. There might be another way to approach this that would be creative and better and beneficial for them and for me. And we all do it. You all are doing it. But I think if we have a conscious process of doing that, it will help. That may be more than you want to know, but it's an example.
I can I can just say something about that with a story that I'm aware of a woman whose husband was an alcoholic, and he was the bender type, and he would try to keep it under control when they were together. But if she had something that took her out of town, he would just kind of go off the deep end. And it would take a while for him to even come back to some sense of normalcy after that. But this was a real pattern they had. She'd go out of town. She'd know he'd get drunk and be in miserable shape when she got back. She got some advice to get out of that habit, that pattern that they had established between themselves. And one weekend she was going out of town. She said, honey, I noticed they've got a sale on your favorite bourbon down at the Walgreens. You might want to get 2 or 3/5 of that while it's on sale, and just left it at that instead of bashing him for what he typically did. And it threw such a wrench into their normal pattern that it opened up a possibility for a new pattern to develop. Anyway, in that case, it happened to be successful. Probably
That's a good
9 out of 10 times it wouldn't be. I don't know.
Many times it's trial and error for many of us, I think, in life and relationships. And some of you may know about Al-Anon or programs for spouses or whomever. And there's a whole list of letting goes. Letting go doesn't mean you don't love them. Letting go just means you can't change them. And I think sometimes that's what we're about. We really try to change something, even if it's your spouse and you want good for them. But it doesn't work. And I think after a while, if we see if this just is not working, this does not help. But many times we stay in that same rut. You've heard that old definition of a rut is a grave open at both ends. I think many times we just stay on that same track. And if it's not working, we can say, wow, there may be another way. And sometimes you can explore that with the other person and come up with a different way. And, one is letting go and the other is telling about the sale, as you said, Stephen. So,
Well, throwing out an idea that just unbalances the pattern so that at least there's a chance of something new happening.
It's a habit. Good. Anyone else have something? I could talk more, but I want to hear from you if you have a question or a comment or even a beg to differ. I can handle those as well.
There's nothing in the chat, so Terry is inviting you to unmute yourself and throw a question at him if you want.
I'll invite you.
Terry, this is Diane Wilson.
Diane Wilson?
Hi there. I would like to know, what is the hardest part of being a therapist for you? What's the most difficult thing you do?
Great question. I can think of many off the top of my head. I think sometimes it's I'll give an example. I think a parent who's trying to change their 21-year-old child and they can't control them anymore. They can't get them out of the house. They can't motivate them to do something. Now, I'm not saying that's the most serious thing, because I'll tell you what, if you're dealing with someone who's suicidal, those are things that are so hard and so challenging, and you do everything you can to help them stay alive and do what they need to do and get the help they need to do that. Now, from an emotional perspective, that's probably one of the hardest things I deal with. Sometimes they may even have a weapon with them, or they are doing things. Believe me, as a therapist, those are some of the scariest times, I would say to you, that I have seen. Give me the gun. Those are tough, scary, challenging situations. I think when someone is trying to change another person and they have to come to realize they cannot change them, it's a tough thing, because not unlike what we're saying here, I think that's a difficult one. I think that a person who doesn't want to change is difficult, And so my idea is therapy is about some things that you could do or change or improve that will be good for you and probably a relationship with another person or whatever situation you have. And if it can be invitational, that's really a good thing. My daughter sees mostly children and adolescents and families. When I was dealing with adolescents, I was adolescent and I don't want to be there and I'm made to be there. And so you just establish a relationship. You don't start talking about the problem because they don't want to talk about the problem. If their parents would change, they'd be okay, right? If parents think, well, if this kid would change, we would be okay. Good luck. So you just establish a relationship and get to know them, and you get to know them. My term is meet them where they are as best you can. It's a challenge to do what many of us do, and therapy really is, but I love doing it. It's an opportunity. I'm amazed. In fact, one of the books I've written is this life-changing stories. I've seen so many people do things. Did I mention to you about the couple who the minister said, left a voicemail, I probably should not have done this, but I officiated a wedding for this couple. And I only did it with understanding if they would come to you at least for a year, probably every week for therapy. Because if they don't kill each other, it'll be amazing. If they stay married, it will be a miracle. I don't think I shared that story with y'all, did I? Well, now that was a challenge. They came in, and one of the first words she said was, I killed my first husband. And this was the fourth marriage for each. They were both in AA. She was also in Narcotics Anonymous, and they met at Sex Addicts Anonymous. They just fought and had sex, if I may say that was their life. And hearing her story was wow, it was a horrible story of background. And her first husband, she married when I think she was turning 17. Now, whether she's 17 or not, I don't know, but she was turning 17, she said. And they were been drinking and doing drugs and partying and whatever else. And this fighting, said we were fighting about something. We were always fighting about something. He went to the bedroom, got a gun, came after her. They fought over the gun. The gun went off and shot him and killed him. And she spent 7 years in prison. That was her first marriage. Now, the next three were not as violent, but they were bad marriages. And it was tough. His were not as violent as that, but they were just tough. His dad left, he was an alcoholic. So I used about every tool in my therapist toolbox with this couple. And they began to do some things. I'll tell you one thing I did that I think was a turning point for them. I said, I want you all to be quiet for 5 minutes, which I just want you to be quiet for 5 minutes. I want you to think about what the other person was like when they were a little kid. I just want you to think about what that person was like when they were a little kid. They sat there for 5 minutes, and I kept them to 5 minutes. And during that 5 minutes, I saw a fist kind of loosen a little bit. I saw a jaw relax a little bit. And I saw them glance up a little bit. I saw a tear coming down. And the next thing was for them to share. And she said, I think that you were this cute little boy. Your dad left when you were just a kid. He was an alcoholic. Your mom worked jobs to support y'all. She's a piece of work. She can be meaner than a snake and like syrup the next. She said, I think you just wanted to feel loved. I think you just wanted to feel loved. You wanted a daddy, you just wanted to feel loved. And you saw a tear come down his eye. And she called him by a name of endearment when she said that to him, rather than his given name. And he looked at her and he said, you're right, that's right. And she said, I know you're this cute little redhead. And I know that your dad was an abusive alcoholic, abusive to you and to your mom. I know that your older brother molested you for several years when you were a little kid. I think you always wanted to feel safe. I just think you wanted to feel safe and cared for. And she nodded, and they hugged for a long time. And you could see, and they were crying and hugging. And she said, I hope y'all don't feel offended by it. She said, that's the longest we've ever hugged each other without getting it on. And then we kind of laughed. But it was an interesting couple. But I think what I could see going on, empathy began to form in them for the other person, not pity, but empathy. They began to pray for each other every day. They began to pray for each other every day. And for God to help them be a good husband, a good wife to them every day. They started going to that church where the minister had officiated their wedding and joined the Sunday school class. They're still married. Now, it's not the kind of marriage any of you would want. But to me, it's a challenge. And I'm always wondering and working with, and I also meet with other therapists in our office in fact, every Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, we talk, not, betraying names and confidences, but just collaborating and helping. And as a therapist, I get to offer, mentoring to a lot of other counselors. So I think it helps to have other people's ideas. Those are tough ones, but I'm always amazed at what people can pull off. I'm truly amazed at what people can, I don't know you, but what people can come through and survive and make it. Stories in here about a bipolar person that I've written, the recovering alcoholic, man with road rage, all these kind of things that people come with, severe depression and high anxiety and panic attacks. All these things are tough, but it's a privilege to work with them when they're willing to reach out for help. Man, you can go a long way with that and hang in there with them. I'm answering your question longer than maybe I should, but thank you so much for your question. We all have them in our professional lives, in our family lives, personal lives, but I think keep praying. And I have one thing I would like to read to you that's from scripture that might be helpful before I really wrap up, Stephen, if that would be okay as well.
Sure. Go ahead, Terry.
I'm a great believer in Psalms. I don't know if I shared Psalm 46 with you all in the first week, but I thought one that would fit for today. Psalm 40. I waited. Things don't always happen instantaneously. I waited and put all my hope in the Lord. He leaned down to me in the pit, my word. He listened to my cry for help. He lifted me out of the pit, out of the mud and filth, and set my feet on solid rock. He steadied my legs. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise for our God. Many people will learn of this and be amazed. They will trust in the Lord. So I think our faith can always be helpful to us as we go through our tough times and help us get out of the pit. But God goes down in the pit with us. I do believe that. We're not alone there as well, and helps us getting out of that pit.